For three.
Yeah.
You're live.
Okay,
Okay, so
so
this is the Senate Education Committee, April 15th, a little bit after 1:15. We're gonna spend the next, in a way, hour and a quarter or so working on our budget letter and having discussion. But I realized over the weekend, as I started to put together something for us to look at. And then was going through emails, I realized that we had kind of let the community schools fall through the cracks here. We got one letter from them that we never called our own attention to. So I realized that, so invited them in because they are an important part of the landscape, and wanted to hear their budget request. So is everybody come, who's going to testify?
We both are.
You can pull
Yeah.
two chairs up
Yeah.
to each other, or however you want to do it. It's fun to pull two up together.
Yeah. Just grab. No worries. And I have printouts for you,
Okay,
so I'm gonna send more of this.
and does Will have one of those to post?
Yes, he does.
Okay.
we have to.
You have, oh, you have it.
We all have.
Oh, we all have.
Larry, we'll do it now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. And I was so impressed. I felt the courage.
That's Will. That's not us.
Okay, well,
Thank you.
So we actually haven't met in person before. So Senator Ron Hinsdale may come in. I saw her out in the hall somewhere. Senator Hashim is out today unless he joins. He just jumps on. Okay, there he is. There's Senator Hashim from Wyndham County, and then we have
Dave Weeks, representing Rutland County.
Seth Longworth from the Bennington Senate District.
Terry Williams from Rutland County also.
Steve Heffernan, Addison County District.
nice to meet you.
So, and then introduce yourself for the record.
Sure. So I'm Jessica Carroll's. Some of you probably remember me from working at the Agency of Education as the Division Director of Student Pathways. And I'm joined by my colleague.
I'm Bernice Gurnett. I'm a faculty member in the College of Education and Social Services at the University of Vermont.
And we really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. So I understand that time is of the essence. So while you do have a 7-page document in front of you, we are not going to read it word for word. But we did want to just provide a brief overview for those of you who maybe haven't heard about community schools, just the background. And then the digital copy, you have live links throughout the document in which you can reference public facing documents. So just to begin with, Act 67, which was passed in 2021, the Community Schools Act was state legislation that followed the model of federal legislation that goes back as far as 1974, in which it described a vision for schools as hubs of both learning, but also how to connect community resources in order to improve the lived experiences of students and families and communities. In 2021, when that legislation was passed, they appropriated ESSER funds, federal funds, for 3 years and tasked the agency to develop a grant program. That was my job. And when we developed the grant application process, we decided that, like other pieces of federal legislation, it might be important to see this as a multi-year effort, because what we know from implementation science and from research is that change takes time, particularly in the education space. So we had sufficient funding for 3 years of a community school grant. We had 6 applications in the summer of 2021. The legislation was really clear to make sure that schools had money in hand September 1st. I think I was handed this program on June 28th. So it was a bit of a sprint. And it was also right in the midst of probably the worst part of the pandemic, right? So you still had schools wildly disrupted of having to close and then having schools come back in. You are just coming out of probably one of the toughest years for schools and educators and administrators. And yet we had 6 applications and we were able to award 5 of them. Over the course of the implementation of the grant, we established some parameters in which we wanted to make sure that people saw this as policy as permission as much as precept, right, or prescription, and that they really allowed themselves to benefit from the ARC ESSER funding, and particularly that the ARC ESSER funding, and you may have heard this from some of your colleagues over at the agency, allowed for some creativity and some flexibility that usually doesn't come with some of the normal federal funds that were used in like title funds. In so doing, I also had the opportunity, I had made a decision that I would take every phone call about community schools as it arose, which I ended a year in because there was a lot of interest. And I was one person with a 40% vacancy rate in my division. But I had the opportunity to meet Dr. Garnett, and we actually started a research practice policy partnership year one, which is a term of art that she will be able to explain to you. But really, it just was about a year of the two of us sort of connecting and meeting and thinking about how is it that we're going to support this cohort. All of this is to say, in so doing, we were able to build a community of practitioners, which we have continued today. And I want to talk a little bit about the pillars of community school and how it tracks to both what you've been hearing a lot this year about transformation and also what goes back to federal legislation. So you will see, and I did not number the pages, but we did rapidly number the pages of the documents we brought. So apologies, folks. But if you look at the bottom of the first page and the second page, what I think is of note is that from its inception, the federal government had a set of goals for community schools that really aligned with the Vermont goals. So you look at those pipeline services, high quality early childhood education programs, high quality school and out of school time programs and strategies. Probably one that's most familiar to folks is after school programming. Support for a child transition between schools and into post-secondary, which we see reflected in Act 77, family and community engagement and supports, activities that support post-secondary workforce readiness. Again, very much CTE, flexible pathways, work-based learning, community-based supports for students. And again, that idea of integrating so that community partners and schools come together, not to duplicate services, but to bring each of their expertise together to make connections for students and families. Social health, nutrition, and mental health services and supports, and then juvenile crime prevention and rehabilitation programs. And much of that means that we know that there's research out there that connects that when students disengage from school and have chronic absenteeism, they tend to get involved in other systems, including the juvenile justice system. And so from the beginning, right, this integration or integrated approach was beginning in 1974 to 1978 to even 2015 when it was built into ESSA or ESEA, the federal legislation that guides much of our work. And so the passage of Act 67, there's four pillars at the national level: integrated student supports. And so this is at the bottom of page 2, expanded and enriched learning time and opportunities, active family and community engagement, collaborative leadership and practices. And then we added Vermont, the legislature, safe, inclusive, and equitable learning environments. And the note I would make is, and we built this into the grant application, is this really represents probably more than 2 decades of education, legislation, and reform efforts that you have passed. I did not inflict upon you me listing the nearly 3 dozen education bills and acts that have been passed that I can literally map explicitly to this. Instead, that is inflicted on the cohort who has a 55-page education connection component. But I think it's important to note that we have programs that we have passed. This is a systemic approach. This takes all of those programs and it braids them together. And what we have seen, so again, if you move to page 3, when we think about community schools in Vermont, what we are seeing is that something in which we have now made, starting this year, a minor investment. We invested $1 million of state education funds. And however rocky the implementation of that was, what we've seen, because it both supported extension and continuation grants for the first cohort and development grants for the second cohort, that we are impacting a significant % of our public education
So
system.
you've been, just to make sure I understand this, between ARPA and now the state funding line, you've been operating with about $1 million a year.
Yeah, so this year, $1 million of state education funds. When we broke it out, if you look at schools, it was probably less than that, significantly less, because each of the SUs that were awarded in that first cohort of our BESSER funds were somewhere between $200,000 to $225,000 a year. And when we met with policy folks who support the health committee and work with Senator Sanders, we were told that we have actually implemented community schools cheaper than the national average and based on any state. So this is why I put this table together.
So
Yeah.
just to make sure, you can understand this, you have been operating on about $1 million a year for the last 4 years, is that? accurate?
The entire grant program. Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah. okay.
But not for school.
No, yes.
Yes,
first of
okay,
all,
not
the entire program. is
Yeah,
been
The
done.
entire program, yes.
Yeah.
And so I put this table together and I made some adjustments because I had added a table or a column last minute before I sent this to you around the number of schools at each SU. So based on the Agency of Education's education report, we have 11 SUs. So that's out of 52 that are operating. Adding up all of the schools, they represent, so there's 74 schools within those SUSDs. This is out of 287. And then the total number of students, and I took that from the education directory that is published every year. What you see in the last two columns, the number of CS schools, which stands for community schools, and the CS student population is where, and conservatively, because I do know that there has been additional expansion, but I didn't want to misstate anything, is these are the number of schools that were explicitly included in the grant applications as being community schools and the direct population of students who are benefiting. So that's 7,743. And looking at that is wanting to make the argument, because we have heard that there was concerns, I think, understandably, as a result of the pandemic, right? Then 2 back-to-back floods, right? The amount of churn, the fact that we've had buildings that have been under construction, you have kids starting the school year in tents, that there was increased cost and burden put on taxpayers. And I know that there has been a suggestion that that was as a result of community schools. And wanting to be really clear that not only have we seen a developing return on investment at the state level, that maps to national data. So I think conservatively at the national level, there's a 11, is it 7 to 1?
7.11.
7.11 to 1 return on investment for every dollar spent for community schools. With New Mexico,
Yeah, $7.11 for every dollar. And then in California, it was a $15 return.
How is that?
Yeah.
yes. So this is what we wanted to get into, because something that we also promised your colleagues in House Education is that we were really committed to wanting to quantify that in Vermont, but you've also heard that we can take national models, right? But applying them in Vermont requires some adaptation, because otherwise you're just putting, trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. So,
Before we do that,
Yeah.
what happens when you do grants?
Mhm.
You make them the grants for a year or two, whatever it is. What happens when the grant goes away?
Yeah.
Is part of what you look to do, set them up to continue after the grant?
yes, and that's where that integration and coherence around what is existing policy. For years at the agency, I would have folks from the field say, can you just give me a schematic that shows how it all fits together? Which is a completely legitimate request. But when you have layers upon layers upon layers of, you have legislation, you have rule, you have policy, sometimes it's like, well, what do I pull in as a schematic? This is the schematic, the 5 pillars, and the language used in those pillars, you can map to multi-tiered systems of support, to flexible pathways, right? To hazing, harassment, and bullying legislation, et cetera. And so what we've been doing, what I've been doing with the work with our community of practice, is building alignment tools for them to align their strategic plans to the community school pillars, their continuous improvement plans to the community school pillars. I even worked in St. Johnsbury on their town policy about education and mapping that, because if you look, you can see that there's alignment. And by having that alignment, you find efficiency so that people are not duplicating effort. I've also done that with their investment requests. So looking across all of the sources of funds, state funds, local funds, philanthropic funds, federal funds, and you often can have overlap, things like the tobacco grant, right? Or the connected stronger connections grant or title funds. And to really look at, don't duplicate effort, find alignment there, and then look at where are your gaps and how do you build that out. And that is work. And again, we are just representing the people who are on the ground actually doing this work. But we know that supportive accountability is really effective from the perspective of saying people hold themselves to very high standards higher than what we can hold them to. If you provide them the support, they will meet those standards. They will exceed those standards. I do want to just give space for Bernice to talk about this new work that we're developing around Vermont return on investment.
Yeah. And I just wanted to give a specific response to that question related to what you do when the grant ends, right? The first Harper Esser Community Schools grant was for 3 years, which we know is actually a short lifespan in terms of school-wide change. But 3 out of the 5 original awardees were able to build it in to their local education budget after 3 years, which is pretty remarkable if you remember the budget season in Vermont schools last year, right? So the school boards, the superintendents, the principals, the community recognize the power of community schools and the role of the community school coordinator, which is really the bulk of what the grant is going to pay for, is this personnel cost, right? Which is the linchpin of doing the work, liaisoning with the community and building capacity so others can do their job. And they can take on the role of finding resources, connecting kiddos to services, expanding flexible pathways, meeting with new community partners. So that's where the bulk of the grant dollars are going, is to this role of community school
And
coordinator.
bringing new dollars in.
Correct, which is this return on investment. And then the second piece with this grant is, as someone who represents an institute of higher education, one of the things early on that I was committed to in my university is maintaining our commitment to community schools implementation. And I saw the amazing work happening, and I said, universities have the opportunity to go after grants and write things and do fact research. So we're bringing in an additional $2.2 million through federal grants to support community schools on the ground. That would not have been possible without this research practice partnership. And that's through a grant from Senator Sanders from the correct congressional direct spending request. So we're committed and we're supporting on the ground. But again, that is one option for school to pursue, which is allowing us to expand into 11 SUs.
But predictability, is key to sustainability, right? And what we know is that when you rely on the state having to pursue grant funds, you don't have that level of predictability, right? And that was a criticism that I would say we both had around the federal program for community schools, because they actually had individual districts applying. So I want you to think about Caledonia Central competing against LA Unified School District, right? Which probably has the population, twice the population of Vermont. So, right, I think New York City's school population is 1.2 million people, including educators, right? So that's twice the population, right? It's just not a competitive, it's not a fair competitive playing ground.
So when we testified last year and we presented on this really powerful return on investment of the role of the community school coordinator. And so we reached out to Apex Consulting, which is a consulting firm that worked with New Mexico Public School in Albuquerque and in Boston, and said, hey, we would love to utilize your application to look at the return on investment of a community school coordinator in rural community schools in Vermont that operate differently. And one major difference is a lot of our community school coordinators are supporting multiple schools within a district, as opposed to the national model, which is one coordinator for one school. So we're going to hopefully potentially have even a larger return on investment because our coordinators are supporting multiple school ecosystems within one district. So last Friday, we invited our New Mexico colleagues up. We hosted a day-long training at the Agency of Education for 3 of our community school coordinators to use their application to input. So what it is, it's the expense of the coordinator over the benefits. It's a pretty simple algorithm to produce what was leveraged that would not be possible without this person. And that can be from volunteer hours, food donations, field trips, other grants. And so that's what they use. And there's a specific data application that allows coordinators to document all that they're doing on a regular cadence. So then the algorithm can produce, wow, without this person, we would never have gotten this youth voice grant to allow our kiddos to go travel to do this.
So, does the way the program works, does it just apply to you for a grant, maybe for $100,000 for 3 years or whatever,
So,
for the coordinator and other things, then the
Right.
hope is that at the end of 3 years, they're in a position to carry it forward.
yeah, similar to, so we're in an unusual space, right? As you know, I've transitioned out of the Agency of Education. Also, what was passed last year was 1 year of funding. And so when I had modeled the community school grant initially, it was based on the 21C Title 4B of ESSA program. It's that after school program. It's probably the single largest system of after school programs in the state with, 100 sites. And that's a 5-year program just for after school programs. After school program expanded in enriched learning time and opportunities, which is pillar 2 of 5 pillars in community schools. It's just one, right? So really what would be best suited to that predictability and that scale is to have a multi-year grant opportunity. Now, state funds operate differently. So minimally having a predictable appropriation on an annual basis that can help get folks started, get them into the space in which we do some of that strategic planning, looking across investments, building out those relationships so that they can get to sustainability is probably the best mechanism while, we would be continuing in that partnership to look for other funding opportunities from philanthropic, to federal opportunities.
So you're looking for the 1 million we're talking about to be added to the base.
I think as a grant program to support systemic change, it has proven to be highly effective.
And so does most of the million, so we're just,
Yeah,
just to understand it, does most of the million actually go to support your work?
No,
No.
And
directly.
raise
No.
funds, direct
No.
support, okay.
Yeah. And they build out budgets
Yeah.
based on what they're saying they're going to do across the 5 pillars. I think what Bernice was sharing is that probably one of the single biggest investments that folks make initially with grant dollars is that community school coordinator. But as we have shared, even at the height of a very challenging budget season, 3 of the 5 awardees were able to build that community school coordinator into their local budget because of its effectiveness.
And what happened to the other 2?
The other 2 were able to sustain some things. This is where that funding that was made available, which was supposed to go out September 1st and was delayed, created some challenges for that continuity, right? And again, this is where there's a lot of transition happening, a lot of churn in the system right now. And I think the more that we can continue to support things that are working and that have promise and make that predictable, the better situated we are to start to realize some of the benefits of those efficiencies, that effectiveness and that quality. And so again, and because it is my failure to number pages for all of you, if you look at community schools have an evidence base, what we want to do is bring side by side both what national research says and then what we're seeing on the ground. So as an example, we know that community schools, meet the needs of low achieving students in high poverty schools and help close opportunity and achievement gaps. So this is this table right here. This is the second table. I see some of you are there. And particularly for what we call historically marginalized groups in this state. And as an example, at White River Valley SU, and I know you had heard from Jamie, 100% of the students on IEPs who had graduation goals for last year, for fiscal year 24, graduated in 4 years, right? At NCSU, we had 78 students participated in dental screenings, right, through 802 Smiles. And that's because of the work of the community school coordinator and the mindset of the administrators, both principals and superintendents and staff who are working at those schools. Cabot, this is CCSU. They had 0 external referrals outside of school to serve students on IEPs, right? Which I think is huge. If we want to talk about cost drivers, right? When you think about schools and systems developing the capacity to serve students in-house, right? That's pretty remarkable to me. And then Virgins really had probably one of the most tremendous mentoring programs, right? And I think we are taking way too much time, and we understand that. But if you look side by side, we want to just pull out some of those most compelling pieces of national research to prove that it's not just citing national research, that it's happening on the ground. And that what we wouldn't want to do is let this, just even through accidentally forgetting about it, let something that's proving to be effective sort of die. Because I do think that what happens is it exacerbates initiative fatigue on the ground, and it really eradicates trust between schools and communities, because communities just don't understand that it's not the school that stops doing something. It's because we didn't continue to support a program, and so the school can't continue to do that. And that really breeds that distrust that we really want to start to improve upon. So I think we would just pause here to see if there's any questions.
Senator Williams.
So, community schools coordinators, who you work?
I work for myself,
Okay,
but I've been running the community of practice for the community school awardees to bring folks together to learn from each other, along with my colleagues at UVM. I also will be a doctoral student at UVM next year, working in the Catamount Community School Collaborative, because in my years of working in education, I've never seen something as effective as this, that brings systemic change and not programmatic change that can come and go based on personalities. And I also was hired by the Vermont Rural Education Collaborative, and you might remember when John and I were in, and that was just ASUs who made an investment outside of having a grant, who just wanted to continue to scale this work and build that capacity.
so who trains the coordinators?
So it's interesting. A lot of community school coordinators come from different backgrounds, but they are all hired by the schools. But many of them are people who've worked at community-based organizations, have really expertise in engaging community members. Some might come from public health backgrounds, social work backgrounds. And as part of the work and the investment that UVM has made to continue to support this work, there is going to be a course that's offered, and we have many people who have signed up to take that course on being a community school coordinator. And I was working with some colleagues at the Agency of Education to start to think about how could we make sure that there's an endorsement area so that that position can be sustained.
Just one more. Okay.
So where's the continuity for these coordinators? How, so that everybody's getting the same
Yeah.
look?
Yep.
The same,
So when we initially launched the grant program, I met with every single awardee 4 times a year. And then I brought the cohort together 4 times a year. And I did that for 3 years. We are continuing to do that with the community of practice. And that's why we developed the course at UVM.
And in addition to doing site visits, so where we visit with the community schools once a year, do interviews, observations, collect data, share that.
Yeah, and in the digital copy, you'll see there's a hyperlink to some digital stories, there's some videos, because we wanted to capture that. It's really hard to articulate, because it's like if somebody said, well, like, what's school? And you're like, what isn't school, right? So you get a sense of what does that look like on the ground in their own words. And again, I would just emphasize, the people who've been doing the work, right, are not sitting in front of you right now. We're just trying to, we're just provided the opportunity to be able to say that because they're all in classrooms right now. Yeah.
Senator Reese.
thank you. So it's clear today, and it's been clear every time you've been in here, you guys are very passionate about the program. We get it. What's your relationship now with AOE, and why aren't they in the room?
So, can't speak for AOE. I will say that we continue to meet on a weekly basis with Johannes Hensch, who I'd hired the second year of the program, who is facilitating the program. And we have a strong relationship. I think, as you know, the agency has also been focused on other efforts. I know that they were in House Education, briefly talking about several different programs, and had done a brief presentation on community schools. But as you know, the letter I sent to you is not the first letter that I have sent around, wanting to make sure that community school awardees could come in and speak from their position, right, and from their expertise on the ground about what this looks like. Because again, you need to make a decision about whether this is worthy of investment. I think that they are best positioned to convince you of that. My experience has been is that if we don't support and put policy in place to provide that permission, as well as those parameters, it doesn't happen, right? And if we want to have that consistency, you want to have people working to a same set of goals under a common set of pillars versus however they want to interpret it, right? And that's the social compact that these awardees have made.
Yes.
You said you work for yourself, so do you get a grant? How do you afford to do this? Or are you just giving your time?
Well, this is me giving my time. Yes. I'm not paid to advocate for this.
I'm sure you're passionate about it.
I'm passionate about it, and I left the agency at a time in which I wanted to see this through. And also because I think it works. And so I'm here as just citizen, Groton, Vermont, formerly of Castleton, born at Rutland Hospital, who is saying that in my years of working in education and working at a policy level for state and municipal government, and having collected these data and worked with researchers who have far more facility with advanced data reporting techniques, this works. And it's worthy of a very small investment when you look at other programs that get significantly more money, serving significantly fewer students.
Because would the $1 million be a line item in the AOE budget, or how does that work?
So I think the AOE is best positioned right
How did
now.
it work last year?
So last year it was a one-time appropriation in the budget bill.
Yeah.
I think there is an avenue.
But it went to AOE.
It went to AOE,
AOE,
correct.
and then
And
And then there was a design
That's
to
for the budget.
connect to
Yeah, okay.
the federal
So we're
funding.
talking about a $1 million line item. in the AOE
Correct,
budget.
Right,
Yeah.
correct.
One more.
Sure.
So how do you measure success? Of the
Mhm.
5 of the 6 awardees,
Mhm.
how did you evaluate whether they use the money properly or not?
Yeah, so I think there's both some common elements, and then because community schools really is designed both at the federal level and at the state level to serve communities, you have to have the flexibility that allows for people to respond to community needs. And we know that across the state, even though it's a small state, there's different, right? What Pulteney needs or what Rutland needs is going to be really different than what Canaan needs, right? Or say Johnsbury needs. And so what we did is we started to look, and I brought something that I can leave with you, but it's also linked
Okay.
in the document, is I first was looking at state level metrics. And so when we look at that integration and coherence, I was looking at where people were making investments as it pertains to existing education quality standards, state board rules, right, district quality standards, or existing statute. And so as an example, we had 100% of the community school awardees invested in 51 activities or strategies that supported or sustained ESTs, education support teams, multi-tiered systems of support, and health and wellness. 100% invested in 30 activities or strategies to support social emotional learning, school counseling, restorative practices, or career college advising. And so you're looking at state metrics to say, are they investing in the things that we know align to rule and are proven to be that vision that we have in Vermont about a substantially equal education? We also then looked though at, based on their applications and what they said they wanted to do, did they start to see some of those differences? And that's where you'll see some of those data around a 50% reduction in absenteeism within 3 years, right? In the 9th grade, more than 30% reduction in disciplinary referrals with, and the caveat, because we're trying to keep this short, is that when we were looking at those data more deeply at OSSU, even with the discipline infractions that were happening, I believe that Dr. DiGiulio would say that I was being reflective of or being accurate, is that it was kind of lower intensity, just right. Like, so he always says, like, the guys who are running down the hall and like jump up and slap, the overhead, right? Where it's not, some of the, maybe more intense or severe disciplinary infractions. We had a 7% decrease in behavioral referrals in 1 year at White River Valley SU. But even getting beyond some of the behavioral pieces, right, that I think people are like, yes, but this is school. Are people learning? If you look at, and again, it's in that table, the right here is at White River Valley SU, 73% of fourth graders at Bethel Elementary were proficient or exceeding proficiency on the spring ELA VT cap.
Okay, we need to.
Sure, the state's seven classes. Yeah,
How'd you get the data? How'd you get these?
right. We're working directly with SU.
And that's where research practice partnership is very helpful.
Yeah.
Really wants to share.
Okay,
One quick
and it'll be very short, yes.
Okay, so, I get it that different schools make different investments, but there are some common goals.
Yes.
I find your data a little, you're cherry picking. Now, you react to my comment,
I
let's
will.
see where we go.
Yeah.
So the 50% reduction in absenteeism for that particular school, okay, that's great. But did you see the net effect of absenteeism in the next school, and the next school, the next school? You know, it's like, here's a really good piece of data. That's great. But you don't compare it to, well, you know, with that investment, how did it go in the other schools? Was there a net effect? Was it positive? Was it negative? Don't know. I mean, you don't know. It's very much a cherry picked list. That's first blush.
Yeah.
No.
So I would maybe not characterize it as cherry pick, but this is a 7-page document to be efficient. What we are looking at is you can look across their continuous improvement plans, and this is some of the alignment work that we're doing, is people have different baseline data, different number of students, different number of behavioral incidents, different challenges that they approach. So we do have to compare them to themselves, right? So you're looking at the growth, right, across, like, within a cohort. What we're also working on then is a data inventory in which I think what you're looking for is out of the total number of students that they have, can we measure the growth or the change in absenteeism across the entire cohort of students served? And right now, and I will just say, even when I was at the agency, we just don't collect that level of
Okay.
data. So what we've been designing, and this is why we had the research practice partnership, is that working directly with the SUs, we can get that individual level student data that is protected under FERPA, that requires data sharing agreements and contracts and MOUs, and it has to go through a vetting process, right, when you're talking about research, which we have done. And that's our next phase. But again, to see some of those initial pieces is promising and worthy of the investment of doing that scan. We just don't have state data systems that collect on for people to track across time. I mean, it'd be great if we did, but we just don't.
Are you in the AOE budget at this point?
For this fiscal year. And it ends
For
after.
this coming.
Not for the coming,
In
not
July.
for FY
So
July,
you were
no,
put in last year.
Correct.
So far, you're not in.
no.
Governor's
Not
not
because recommend. Okay, okay, got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, thank you for all the
Thank you.
time.
Thank you for
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Let me know if there's any follow-up or if you have questions, we can just
Yeah.
answer them asynchronously.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much. Yeah.
So I, over the weekend, because I loved it, I didn't do it, never gonna get a lot done. Took a stab at the beginnings of the budget letter. And again, I did it like, I did it with my name to say, it's not what I think, I want to, we should move this, and, you know, I just got something down, so we had to start with. Something started when I did use some of my own judgment on this stuff, which is, and that's all I did. So, I will tell you that if I were doing this, I would put that request in. No, the 1 million for the community schools.
What we just heard.
I'm a real fan of the county. I have to be a fan of community schools. I don't know what they're going to do. So I don't know how you want to start, if you had a time to go through this or not, to look at it, or if you had something else, something I missed entirely.
Yeah.
Were we comparing it to the full list of requests that we got?
Yeah.
Okay, because I would put building bright futures.
I think,
I look for things that help really.
I'm for, I don't ask, I probably, okay, left now. Building, what was the request?
330, 300, I was like, oh, I want to get this down to the cents, and I'm not gonna do it. $322.
Yeah, I meant. I- I meant-
22,000.
Okay. So, building by futures, yeah.
That falls under other,
Well, I had to put them in,
Well, that's why I'm worried. I'm trying to do it
Right.
side by side.
but I didn't.
I'm sure everyone in the room is gonna remind us of this too, but
So make the pitch for building by futures.
so, I mean, I kind of started I start with very big principles. What are we doing right now that's working? What is not a study? What is very efficient with our dollars? And Let's Grow Kids is going away at the end of the year. Building Bright Futures has arisen as the entity that we rely on to make sure we're making progress and living up to our legislative commitments for over 100 million new dollars into CCFAP and into childcare. And I always look at it like universal school meals, what I would look at with the education fund. This is a very small amount of money to make our millions and hundreds of millions of dollars work better for kids. My biggest principle that I use in this whole budget conversation is how do we feed and take care of small children? Because I just think that's the best societal investment we can make.
Can I ask, is Morgan, you represent Building Bright.
Yes.
So how come Building Bright Futures isn't already funded by the heavy investment, which Senator Rome has noticed and alluded to, was the childcare
CCFAP,
CCFAP?
payroll tax.
Thank you.
Sure, if it okay.
Why weren't you rolled into that?
So identify yourself for the record.
Sure. For the record, Morgan Crossman, Executive Director of Building Bright Futures. So we do receive some funding from the state as a base allocation. So we do have a line item in the budget,
So that's it.
but it does not come close, not even 50% of what it takes to actually do what is required of us in statute. So at all times, I'm raising over 50%. This year, our budget's $5 million. Over 75% of that is coming from federal dollars. Coming into this next fiscal year, again, not as a pass-through, not the money that we're putting out the door to communities. We are required to raise almost $1 million a year. It's really important to maintain the public-private partnership where some of our funding is state, some of it is private philanthropic and or federal. But the state investment needs to be increased in order for us to do this work well. And I think you heard Jess and Bernice in the last session talk about data and the lack of data that we have on where our kids are, what they have access to in public and private or community-based settings. One of the things that we're going to be working on in partnership with the Agency of Education and the Child Development Division is building that accountability protocol for pre-K and thinking really critically about what data we need for.
Is that because they redirected you to, or because it's an initiative that you feel needs to be done to support the states?
It's the legislature. It's you all collectively coming in and saying to the Joint Fiscal Office, we don't actually have the data we need to answer the questions we have, and we definitely can't map funding.
Why
to
wouldn't
it.
they fund to do that?
It's not necessarily that they won't, it's that in terms of their education transformation package, it wasn't a key line item. But that our funding does get routed through the Child Development Division's budget, so it's a little
And it
tricky.
can't already be taken out of funds which are coming out of payroll deductions for CCFAP or similar programs? I'm
Can I answer that? Because I mean,
I'm not asking you something
you know,
really.
No.
the advocates in many ways can't, get into the policy question of where these dollars come out of. So I've asked that question of who I think can answer this the best, which is Senator Lyons, as both the architect of our childcare program and a member of appropriations. So I would just say, I think that is on the table, and us saying this is a priority for us doesn't necessarily mean it has to be general fund dollars.
Okay.
Because I agree.
And what was the number?
$322,444.
I'm gonna go with 322.
You can round it up.
I could go with 320.
Thank you.
Okay. But
Something which we did the same drill in our earlier committee today. I'm sure everyone's doing it around the State House, but one thing that worked well was once we get done talking about, well, what's potentially missing, is go around the room to the advocates and say, okay, what's missing? Because we found earlier today, we forgot a few things. So the advocates like, yep, put their hand up, they reminded us. That was helpful.
Yeah. Okay. We'll do that. We found two. I found one yesterday and we found
Right.
one today.
If you want someone to underscore community schools, again, I think if we lose millions of dollars in Medicaid, that is a small amount of money that will help a lot of people's health.
No, I'm sorry. I'm Senator Rashid. So
No
you're,
problem. Thanks. Just a quick question, or clarification. If this was not to be paid for from the general fund, where would that money come from?
The payroll tax goes into a special fund designated just for payouts for CCFAP and I'm speaking way out of turn here, but you know, it's directed to a special fund for families to get access to childcare. That is, you know, many millions of dollars. I would want to be very careful about adding anything to that. And I know Senator Lyons would too, but it really seems like it's on the table that a tiny bit of that money go to making sure all of those millions of dollars are being well spent and going to the people who need them most.
Got it.
So
Thank you.
the payroll tax, which is, it's a separate fund.
so you're saying we take it off the top of all that money for, yeah. Okay.
322,000.
Yes.
How much does that raise? I forgot. You spent a lot of work.
We raised an additional 100, oh my God, it's 175 million. I'm totally speaking out of turn, but somewhere between 100 and 200 million last year.
It was developed for 169 million per year.
Right.
That was last year's.
So does it make sense? Just kind of go through this. So for the education reform transition on the first page, and this was really just spitball from here. There's $4 million in the budget for this. We're going to need some of that. I don't know how much this year, depending on how far we get in year one, what's for year two. But it doesn't seem, we're not going to be moving at the speed that the administration first anticipated with the $4 million needed for transition. So I just put in here suggesting to the appropriations committee that they retain two. I have no idea if that's off by a factor of it may be twice as much as we actually need in year one, given or it may not. I don't know. But that would free up a couple $1 million in this year's budget. So I put that in. So thoughts?
It's wise. It's better to be a little over than under.
And it can be held over.
Yeah.
We're going to need it anyway. So, okay.
I haven't seen any, and this could be on me, but I haven't seen anything more specific about how it's spent. I appreciate, or how they envision spending it. I appreciated, I think somewhere you remarked that we're going to need money for legal expertise with mergers, contract negotiations, et cetera. There's very real needs if we're asking districts to merge. I would personally, I don't know if oppose is too strong of a word, but I don't think it's well spent on consultants for AOE to envision transformation. And I have not heard what specifically they would do, but I feel like there is very little money in the state right now for very real need.
Yeah. I don't know how to answer that. We're not going to get the mergers. The mergers aren't going to happen this coming year. That's just not going to happen.
Right.
We're going to have it. So
I don't want $2 million to just go to AOE to do things. I don't think that's well spent.
yeah, I wasn't suggesting, I was thinking more if we didn't, if we might figure out in the next 3 weeks where we need money.
Yeah.
And that we should be holding some until then. That was my thought.
Only recommendation is, again, unfortunately, they're not on the run, is, State Reed to articulate why they need 4, and if they can do it 2, and how they're gonna use it. And all we're doing is looking at each other.
I think it's going to emerge here. A combination of in this room and in finance over the next 3 or 4 weeks, what we need for this year. And I don't know that, but I know what's going to emerge.
I'm sure it will.
And so I just wanted to make sure we're holding back enough money, not that we would just then give it to, and we would hang on to it otherwise.
But to set along his sales point, they never really articulated what they needed for, and I agree completely, but they probably need it, and I bet you they could articulate it in a heartbeat if we gave them money.
I think not that, I think it was for the things you're talking about, but they're not going to happen. At least in part. That's what they're putting, not happening this year. Anyway. So I don't know. Well, I should stick a pin in that, and we'll check in with them. So then what I did, I put other priorities, listed in our received order importance, and I did just put a few of the smaller dollar items at the top to sort of on the theory. So I put the child and adult food program. Remember that one? That was where that was the 182, because they're only reaching about half of what they could reach, and they just to have the administrative support and ability to help the receiving entities. There's a better term for it than that, but the receiving entities, that facilitating agencies, whatever, like Brock, my area up here. So that seemed to me to be like small dollars like the children.
I will always feed children before I do anything else.
But we did that last year. That's my only initial gut feeling is we did meals for all, universal school meals. But I'm not sure what
This is for the little guys in the childcare settings, not.
Because we have childcare choice.
So daycare, essential childcare.
Yeah,
we're paying for childcare too.
right. Well,
That's 169 million.
well, it's mostly though, it is mostly federal funds that they draw down. And so the argument here was, we just need the money to have the staff and the capacity to draw down the funds. We're drawing them down to about half the centers at this point. And I think I forgot the number of what, it's millions of dollars to draw down, and they just need to have the,
You were just saying that the daycare act they're creating got more than we budgeted. They assumed 169 million, we're well over 175. Why can't you take some of that out of that?
I asked the same,
Yeah.
I asked, let's just say I asked about roughly $500,000 that might come off the top. So we can say feeding children and drawing down these federal dollars is important, and still ask the appropriations committee, does this make sense to have it come from a fund that?
I think that's a good idea.
So,
And I'm
yeah.
saying that, that's great to hear.
So I think, and you said this with regard to the building by futures. Our point is where the money should come from. It's just that it's a worthy.
Yes, and I will just say I asked about these two things. I asked about nothing more, but I'm glad you asked that, because those are the other two things that I thought
Yeah.
their money.
If there's money
In a
there for it,
crisis.
it should come out of that rather than.
Or if you don't get the federal funds to draw down.
Then I think it's even more important that, these are programs that coordinate a volunteer, grandma to come feed the kids. They might glean from local farms. They're hanging on by a thread just to feed kids good, local, wholesome food, and feed the staff, by the way, because I used to.
Not, we're shocked value that if we don't get a lot of federal funds, we're gonna be reprioritizing a lot of things.
Yes,
Okay, I mean, like,
100.
everything's on the table.
But no matter what budget conversation we're having, feeding those kids. Priority.
If the parents can't, if the parents can't, there's a balance there. And I don't want to lose focus on that some people with needs can buy their kids food. We just need to recognize that. If we're really going to enter an era of extremis, we need to start making some decisions. I don't think we're there yet, but to your point, if we start losing federal funds,
Mhm.
we need to be very sensitive about it.
I'm extremely sensitive to it, and I think it becomes a financial question of, do we save money by only feeding half the kids in a childcare versus all the kids? I mean, kids eat half a quesadilla, you know, like when we talk about waste and things, I mean, really,
We're talking about, what was it, 32 million a year? Right?
18 million,
Well, it was programmed for 32.
Right, and they
Maybe
didn't
the
use some.
experience is somewhere south.
18 million.
I just look at this as simply as it's 182,000 of our dollars to draw down. I wasn't small, but to draw down a lot of federal money
Yes.
and to provide nutritious food solutions, for some of which will hopefully sourcing locally.
Mhm.
Yeah. So anyway, so what about, if I had Advanced Vermont next, the career hub, remember that discussion?
Can you give us a 10-second overview or could anybody just, it's been so.
Yeah, no, I know. Let me
So many programs.
The career hub was, remember the guy with the showing all the jobs in the CTE, people in CTEs and adult ed, all go to look at where the jobs are. Oh, you're right there.
Hiding behind there. Hello, everybody. This guy, this guy.
We're talking about it prior to the meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tom Cheney, Executive Director of Advanced Vermont. So a quick overview is that one of the things that we do is we created a portal. It's a, online platform for career and education exploration. So people of all ages can go and explore their career options in the state, the education and training needed to gain entry in that career, and then get connected to a whole host of different support services, from Department of Labor to hireability to VSAC and everyone in between. So it's a place where folks go to, explore their options and then actually take steps to move forward in their career or education.
I heard of that.
Yeah.
Connected.
Right.
And remind us that, so you had 350 for 2 years and last year it went down. Now you're seeking for it to go back.
Yeah, we had 350, then it went down to 150, then it went to 350. And last year we actually didn't pursue funding. But we're at a place now where going forward, we really do need sustained funding at that level of 350. We're not asking for anything more than we've gotten before to ensure that the tool is sustained and that we truly meet the need and demand for it by getting out there, making sure folks know about it and how to use it. But if we don't get funding this year, the tool, My Future Me Tool, will not exist as it currently does, if at all. So we just really need this to keep it.
So it's really cool. So it's literally, the tool's going to go away without the.
Yeah, or look very different. Yeah. So we're looking for base funding so that we can continue to sustain it and do that planning needed to make sure that we're doing that important work and getting out in those communities to make sure it's getting used.
Okay.
Thank you.
So thank you. Then next, now I've just added this in, but then the building rights future that we just talked about. Then we have community schools, $1 million to base. And then Governor's Institutes. Remember the Governor's Institutes being in there for everybody? And all they're looking for, they're in the budget. They're looking for a 3% increase over the budget now, so that they are having some missionary. So I don't know what we want to do with that. They're in the budget for 384. They asked to go 396.
I would cut any study out of any bill to fund that. I mean, if we talk about $9,000 or $6,000 in the morning that could go to this study or that study, I would always fund something like this over a study. It helps kids come alive and think about their passions. I mean, I could speak highly of all of these things. I think anywhere anybody in their other committees sees a study or something new is the place to cut. And this is one of the most well-established, well-loved programs in the state. And a lot of people need 3% increases just to survive.
It's very government perspective on. I'm a zero-based budgeting guy.
Mhm.
If you need something, you ask for it. you don't get 3% because you ask for 3%. You get 3% because you need 3%. Or it's zero.
They asked for
They
it.
asked for it. They were in.
I know, but. I'm just
I
saying
think
that
everyone
there's a
needs to
real-
ask for 3%. Inflation went up.
Well, so that's government perspective. I'm not a government guy. So I was, right? And my training, the budget was, I think I had to work out, it was a $10 million budget. The guy I replaced gave me the down and dirty about budget. He asked for twice what you need, expect to get half of what you asked for, and spend every penny. And that's government. Well, maybe not the right. Maybe right. This conversation. But I'm just telling you, just bristles along.
So we're just going from 384 to 396, basically.
But we could come back. to
Yeah.
that. So let's just go through and make sure we have our heads into them anyway, because we only have.
But it's not to government to ask for like 100 studies that each cost
Right,
$25,000.
right.
I would cut every single one of those.
So,
and make it
okay,
easier.
so Vermont, Farm to School and Early Childhood Network. Remember, they lost this funding entirely. And they're asking for it back. It's to keep the Vermont Farm to School and Early Childhood Network alive. I think we all are fairly familiar with the Farm to School program.
In the budget, governor's budget.
I don't.
It
think-
got lost
I think it
halfway
did.
after study's budget.
Oh, okay, got lost, okay, lost it.
It was one of the first things to be acted, like when.
You can have,
the new
I
administration.
remember that. I've drawn a blank on this. And
I mean, God, I feel overly responsible.
Well, we have,
Why?
we have somewhere the farm to school letter,
Yes.
Yes.
can post that.
in that document.
It's USDA funds. I'm pulling it up right now.
Like you said, we saw so many things. It's
The USDA abruptly canceled the local food for schools and childcare program. Month ago. Where's the
Is it in the documents?
Yeah, we have it somewhere, it's, I found it, it was this. I don't know where I found it though.
Budget requests.
It is important to note that 100% of this 1.2 million was dedicated to food purchases, meaning it would have gone directly into the hands of Vermont farmers and producers. On March 7th, 2025, about a month ago, USDA sent a letter of termination. We are now working to gather stories. So this was from mid-March. We're working to gather stories from the field which document the impact of these cuts to our communities.
My letter is dated April 11th, by the way.
Oh, good. Just read that.
April 11th.
Yeah,
So I just throwing caution at the neighbor. This may be, one of the first indicators of a problem. They're the first ones in line to say, yep, they said that we're gonna lose our funding. We lost our funding. It's not a theory. It's a reality. And there might be, somebody more behind it. I just plead a little caution that there may be more behind it. Many more that we need to. Yeah. I do recognize that it's a program without funding.
Okay, so without making any decisions, let's just keep going and make sure we have our head around these, then we can come back to it tomorrow, I guess, or the house. So adult literacy, if I understand this right, was actually a math calculating error, and they were supposed to have this 180 in their budget. And they're just saying, fix the error, calculating error. We can go back and check on that. I really spent time on the state education budget. I had a lot of phone calls with, make sure I really understood what was going on with that request. Let me just find that. will be post this at the April 13th letter from
Yes.
Haley. I'm sorry, it's from the state board.
I don't think I posted that note, right? I don't think I got that, or no, you sent it to me if I got it.
So anything on the adult literacy before we go? Any questions about it? Okay.
I think I'm the one who said I'll always give the money to the kids first, and I would be the bad guy in this one, that it may be an accounting error, but they did put out a bid. These dollars aren't promised to anyone. It is an open process for bidding on each of the counties. And I'm saying that loving adult education, but Chittenden County might decide to go it alone. You know, other counties might find that.
Okay, we'll come back to it.
Yeah.
We have a minute. Let me just explain as best I can. Will's gonna post, I got a letter from Jen Samuelson and Tammy Colby on this is Tuesday, on Sunday, actually. Working at this with. And they had a request that totaled $629 for new money, or I'm sorry, in a way, new money. And in fact, that is new money. And what I realized, let me just go through this with you. What I realized talking with Jen is that not included in this, which is now being posted for you, not included in this request, is just because they were thinking this way, is the $70,000 line item they have now in the AOE budget. So I added that back in here to this request line, just to be clear with the appropriations committee, what we're talking about. So
6.9 includes the second.
no, it doesn't.
Oh, okay.
So, I hypothesized, I made a guess about what we might think makes sense. So the 70,000 line item for AUE budget just makes sense because they can't operate without it. And as we talked about this, one of the line items was the council on retainer that they really think they need in case they get into school, I don't know, complaints or whatever has to happen, whatever all of these things can happen, and they need legal advice. So 36,000 didn't seem like that. I didn't press on where that 36 came from, but they had that there for a reason. And then they had in the budget $50,000. Although where I talked to them, where I realized they really wanted 50 times 2, 50,000 for rewriting either the CTE rules or the special ed rules. They really wanted to, as I talked to Jen, they would really like to have them do both this year, 50 and 50. I just cut it down to 1 and said, do 1 series this year, 1 series next year. And so that's what it costs to do a series. And then they have this larger project, which is reflected in the dollar amount at the bottom here of 375. And it's a longer term program, 3 years, to hire an attorney to go through the entirety of the rules and clean them up and make them conform. She talked about confusion in the field because some of these are so outdated. And it's like using the term commissioner instead of secretary. That's not the real issue. But they had this long-term project to get that done, and they really wanted to be able to do it over the course of 3 years. I said, just talking to Jen, could you get it started with 50? Yes, of course we can get it started with 50. So I put in here what I put in. But I don't know if that makes sense to people or not. Each one of you probably would have done it differently. I made my own kind of guess about what made sense.
Was she sure? So you put these numbers in, will she kind of go back through and say, yes, these are good numbers?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Come over these, get work done.
They definitely need more money.
Yeah.
$70,000.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like these, I think state board of education is radically underfunded for the mission that we give them.
This is still under, I'm sure I'm underfunding, but I think it is enough for them to get. Okay. And then after that, I really just I just didn't have enough information and I couldn't really discern for what we were given, what we should be doing with the state colleges and the end. I looked at the materials, I couldn't even decipher it all, so I gave up.
So can we remotely task them to provide a little clarity so that?
Yeah.
I guess I put it in the same category as healthcare right now. Universities that get federal funding are going to experience a lot of downward financial pressure. I wouldn't want to endorse starting new programs in that climate. I know there aren't a lot of HVAC companies, let's say, for example, and they really, really need workers. And $350,000 seems like something that's a write-off to have the, HVAC technical center of the Vermont State Colleges.
We could just start the program.
Yeah, I just don't think we can be using really precious state dollars right now to start new programs. And we have a lot of, I don't know about in this room, but we have a lot of experience in economic development of exactly that, right? And HVAC programs kind of like what we would fund, and those kind of disappearing into the ether for years. And I think Beth is great. People are watching it probably mad at me, but I just don't think this stacks up an increase over the governor's recommend or the House budget.
But yeah, as I looked at it, I was deciphering it correctly.
All right.
As I looked at the state colleges, most of their request is for maintenance.
Yeah.
That's the real difference in the governor's recommend and what they're looking for. The programmatic didn't even look to be big enough that I really focused. I really tried to parse it out because it was pretty close. It's the maintenance budget, and as I said in here, we all know, on the one hand, it costs more. I have no idea.
Well, sometimes you can't build new programs if your current infrastructure is falling apart. Maintenance is part of the base budget should be for any organization.
So the governor's recommend was $8 million for infrastructure and for maintenance, and their request is 21 million. I just put whatever you can do.
Yeah, try to do better, Nate.
So, and then UVM, I just kind of couldn't decipher what they were actually asking for.
And I'm surprised no one's like around me in the halls to, I used to be on the board, but there's just more to come with higher ed. And, I think we need to feed kids.
So, maybe, we got, it's 2:30. We're supposed to do another meeting.
Yeah, they're ready.
Okay.
They'll invite us when we're
Okay.
ready.
Oh, they'll invite us when they're
Yeah.
ready. Okay. Why don't we,
When we're ready.
why don't I just clean this up? Then we can make decisions tomorrow.
Anything missing?
You know what it was? It's missing this piece. This in terms of that and talk about it.
Or AED program?
Oh yeah, didn't.
I missed the question.
Anything missing?
Well,
Didn't hear the
yeah,
AED program.
if you'd like to put some funding in for cardiac emergency response plan funding, that would be awesome.
Well, that's what we're doing today. So we're trying to make sure that we've got a full list. So you want to review this?
Yeah,
Call us.
we hadn't put in a request previously because there wasn't a policy effort attached to it, but there may be, so.
How much money is it?
what we had estimated is $3,000 would get schools perhaps 2 AEDs and some CPR training, just as a rough estimate. If you funded all the Title I schools, it would be around 500,000, but we know that's not doable. So about a quarter of those, if you wanted to consider it, is more like in the $125,000-$150,000 range. Would provide some cover for schools who might need AEDs and CPR, like we talked about in the SERVS legislation.
I think more public spaces should have life saving. I guess I would think that. Pretty basic. The guard isn't investigated.
They're on a separate bill.
Is it a separate? Okay, they wanted $100,000 in the budget to not be taken from them.
Oh, we didn't do that. I think the thing we're gonna have to really talk about tomorrow is order of priority. Because I have no idea how much money we actually have a chance of.
Oh, share with you what we did in economic development, which actually you missed this part early in the morning, was we had high priority, higher priority, and highest priority. Okay. It's all relative, right? So you just group everybody individually groups their highest and then higher and then high, meaning, some magnitude of,
Everybody gets a participation trophy.
right. But in the end, you end up with, the highest typically, if everybody agrees, it just comes out in a ranking order. It's very simple. And then when you get near that cutoff line or whatever that boundary area is, you start having those conversations about this versus that. Okay. Anyway,
I was able to ask the chair of appropriations, what is a helpful mental exercise to go through for everyone? And just living in their reality, they are about $67 million short right now, and more requests are the ones we're finding are coming in.
Yes, then no.
Love giving everyone
I think we should
a
go.
pat on the back. I don't, as long as we put it in an order, that's fine. But if we prioritize everything, we prioritize nothing. So the order really matters. And I think,
the order doesn't, that might, I was saying
Sure.
facetious.
okay,
The issue is,
yeah.
We're switching over.
Right. So we'll be off, we'll just live stream.
Okay, this last year will end, we'll switch over to be on one set of.